They told me my husband killed himself. I knew within the first hour that he had not. It took me 2 years, a dead man's hidden notebook, and 4 women I had never met to prove it. And what we found was not one murder. It was a system run for 20 years by a man most of the city called a hero. This is the story of how we made him visible. My name is Elena. My husband David was a structural engineer. The kind of man who measured everything twice and slept fine at night because in 15 years he never once cut a corner. That is the first reason I knew he would never have done what they said he did. David inspected large construction projects. In March, he was assigned to a residential tower going up downtown. 41 stories, 800 future homes. And 3 weeks into that job, my husband stopped sleeping. He had found something in the steel. The welds on the main support columns did not match the certified inspection reports. On paper, the building was sound. In reality, it was being built nearly 40% weaker than the people buying those homes were promised. David told me, in his quiet way, that a tower like that does not fail if. It fails when. He reported it through every proper channel. His own firm, the city inspector's office, and the developer itself, a company called the Hale Group, run by a man named Victor Hale, whose smiling face was on bus stops across the city under 3 words: Builder of Tomorrow. And for his trouble, David was told the reports were fine, the matter was closed, and that perhaps he had been under a great deal of stress lately. Too much stress. I want you to remember that phrase because it was not an accident. It was a tool. It is the first nail they hammer into the people they have already decided to bury. David did not let it go. He made copies of everything. He kept a paper notebook, an actual paper one, because he told me that paper cannot be quietly deleted at 2 a.m. And the week before he died, he said he was going to testify in front of the city safety board and stop that tower from ever opening with a single family inside it. He never made it. 11 days later, I came home to police in my living room and a story that was already written. My husband, the man who measured everything twice, had supposedly driven to a downtown parking garage, typed a note on his phone, and stepped off the 9th floor. There was just one problem with their story. David had been afraid of heights his entire life. He took the stairs to avoid glass elevators. He could not stand on a chair to change a light bulb without his hand shaking. And they wanted me to believe he calmly walked to the edge of a 9-story drop and chose it. So I told them. I told the police. I told the detective. I told anyone who would listen that my husband was murdered and that a 41-story building was about to open with a fatal flaw inside it. And that is when I learned how the second part of this works. Because the moment I started talking, someone very good at his job started erasing me. It started the way it always starts, quietly. A coworker mentioned that Elena had not really been herself since the funeral. My husband's firm received an anonymous note questioning my mental stability. A doctor I had never met was somehow quoted in a file about my grief. Then the story about me began to write itself. The poor widow, unstable, obsessed, making wild accusations against a respected man who had generously offered to pay for the funeral. Within 2 months, I was not a witness to a murder. I was a cautionary tale people lowered their voices to discuss. I did not understand it then. I thought I was simply grieving in a world that did not believe me. I know now that every single piece of it was placed there, by hand, by a man whose entire profession is making the truth sound like madness. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because first, they took everything I had left. Stay with me here, because this is the part where I lost. And it is the reason the ending matters. The Hale Group filed a defamation suit against me, a grieving widow with no money, for damaging the reputation of Victor Hale. The legal fees took the house David and I had built. My own family began to ask, gently, whether I had considered that I might be unwell, and the tower opened. On a bright Saturday in October, Victor Hale cut a red ribbon with an oversized pair of scissors, smiled for the cameras, and welcomed 800 families into a building I knew was a coffin waiting for a reason. I stood across the street, broke and alone and dismissed, and I watched them carry a baby through the front doors. That night, I sat in a motel room with the last $40 to my name and David's notebook in my lap, and I made a decision. They had taken the house, my name, and the benefit of the doubt. They were not going to take the one thing David died holding on to: the truth. I just had no idea how a broken woman alone was supposed to fight a man the whole city loved. The answer came from a name in David's notebook I had overlooked for a year. Not an engineer. A reporter David had quietly contacted in his final week. I found her. And when I told her my story, she did not look at me like I was crazy. She went pale, because she said I was the third person that year to walk into her office with the same story about the Hale group and a husband or brother who had died right before they could speak. The third. I was not the only one. And the moment I understood that, I stopped being a grieving widow, and I became something Victor Hale had never had to deal with before: a witness who had found the other witnesses. But finding each other was not enough, and we knew it. Apart, we were exactly what they had made us look like. 3 hysterical women blaming a beloved builder for their private tragedies. We did not just need to prove David was murdered. We needed to prove that someone was being paid professionally to make people like us disappear. And to prove that, we needed to find the man who did the erasing. His name, it turned out, was already known to people who had survived him. A fixer, a reputation specialist who never broke a law, only bent the people around it. A man who went by a single name: Garrett. And a year earlier, 4 other women he had erased, in a completely different scheme, had done the one thing he never planned for. They had caught him on tape and kept his files. When the reporter connected us to those 4 women, one of them, a woman named Maya, slid a folder across the table that changed everything. Inside were Garrett's own records, payments, dates, targets, and one client who appeared again and again across 9 years and a dozen ruined lives, paying Garrett to erase a very specific kind of person. Not ex-wives, not business rivals, witnesses. The client's name was Victor Hale. There it was, in black and white. The beloved builder of tomorrow had spent nearly a decade paying a fixer to bury anyone who noticed that his buildings were not what he promised. David was not his first witness. David was just the first one who kept a paper notebook. But a folder full of Garrett's records still was not enough to touch a man like Hale. He would call it forged. He would call us a conspiracy of grieving women. We had learned, all of us, the hard way, that being right is not a weapon until you can put it in a room no one is allowed to leave. So we built that room, and we built it around the one thing Hale could not talk his way out of: his building. David's notebook held the original weld readings. Garrett's files held the payments to bury them. And the 3 of us, plus Maya's 4, plus a journalist with 9 years of dead witnesses, held a pattern. We brought all of it, at once, to the one attorney in the state Hale's money had never been able to buy, and to a federal building inspector who did not answer to the city Hale owned. And then we did the thing that ended it. We had David's original readings independently verified by 3 separate engineering firms on the tower that was now full of sleeping families. All 3 came back the same. The building was dangerously below code, which meant the city could not protect Victor Hale anymore, because now it was not a grieving widow's theory. It was 800 families living inside the evidence. The tower was evacuated and condemned within a week. 800 families walked out of a building that, the inspectors confirmed, would likely have failed within a few years. Not one of them ever knew how close they came, or that a man named David had died 11 days before he could have saved them sooner. And Victor Hale, the builder of tomorrow, watched his empire come apart in a single season. The condemned tower triggered inspections of every project he had ever touched. 3 more were flagged. The payments to Garrett, once they were entered into a federal court, stopped looking like a conspiracy theory and started looking like exactly what they were. A man buying silence over the bodies of people who tried to warn him. He was charged with fraud, with reckless endangerment, and once the pattern of deaths was laid beside the pattern of payments, with far worse. The man whose face had promised the future spent it instead in a courtroom listening to a dead engineer's notebook be read into the record, one careful measurement at a time. I would love to tell you it brought David back. It did not. There is no version of this where I win. Not really. But on the day that tower came down, controlled, deliberate, into a cloud of dust where 800 families used to sleep, I stood in the same spot where I had once watched them carry a baby inside. And this time, I was not alone, and I was not crazy. I was the woman who was right. People ask me if it was worth it. 2 years, my home, nearly my own mind, for a man I could not save. And I tell them the truth. I did not do it to bring David back. I did it so that the next engineer who measures twice and finds something wrong and stops sleeping is not standing alone when the machine comes to erase him. Because that is the thing they count on. That you will be alone. That the simple story, the stress, the grief, the unstable widow will be easier to believe than the ugly one. They are usually right. They were right for 20 years. They were not right about us. So if you take one thing from David's story, take this. The people who erase witnesses are not afraid of the truth. They have buried the truth 100 times. What they are afraid of, the only thing they have ever been afraid of, is the moment the witnesses stop grieving in separate rooms and find each other. There is one last thing. When Garrett's full records went into evidence, Victor Hale was not the only name that came back across the years. There was a second client. Quieter. More careful. One who never paid Garrett to erase witnesses to a building or a business or a marriage. This client paid him to erase witnesses to other clients. A fixer for the fixers. And we are only just beginning to learn that name. But that is a story for the next one. So if David's story kept you here to the end, then subscribe because this one is far from over. Tell me in the comments. If everyone said you were crazy but you knew you were right, would you have kept going? David did, and it saved 800 lives. I will see you in the next one.